The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people are evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I am Geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Kīlauea and Maunaloa volcano update. Today, Thursday, July 29th, 2021. It's been pretty quiet on both volcanoes on the surface. It's a similar story to last week. So we'll review the signals for you guys today. We'll take questions and discuss questions not only on our current activity, but also on our bonus segments we have today. We have quite a lot of bonus content to give you guys today. One is a follow-up on a deep earthquake centered underneath Kilauea's area from last week. The second thing would be the USGS Volcano Watch that was published today, which discusses the use of weather radar to track volcanic plumes. And then finally, we'll talk about, in a little more depth, the southwest rift zone of Kilauea, the Kauai fault zone, and how those connect to the East Rift and the eruption and intrusion history and dynamics of those places, which relates a little bit to the activity we're seeing today. And so I thought that would be a good prompt for us to talk about those topics. So we'll start off with our monitoring signals. Just to make sure everyone knows that Dane will be monitoring our feeds. So let us know if you have any issues with our feeds, whether it's the audio or anything like that. Yeah, we'll be collecting questions for us to discuss at our midpoint and at the end of our presentation as well tonight. So mahalo Dane for that. So to start off here today, I'm just showing you guys one of the more recent images. We have quite a few images released from the USGS within the last week. And this is just a view looking into the hardened lava lake of Halemaʻumaʻu during a mist blowing over the crater there, and you can see that rainbow nicely pictured in there. And so I've kind of zoomed it in here to take away the original composition. So I'm going to give him back. Mr. Matt Patrick here took this photograph of the USGS. You can see this is actually a photograph of a geologist appreciating a view while in the midst of that scanning of the lava lake surface. So let me click it back here, and I'll read you guys a caption here. It says, HVO geologist conducts a high-precision survey of the inactive lava lake in Halemaʻumaʻu. That's essentially it there. So that's part of a whole bunch of field work being done by the USGS. So that was July 22nd, just 1 week ago today. And as part of the release from July 22nd, we also have a few other images and little snippets of stories to share with you guys here. So one is that the HV geologist conducted gas mapping down on that down drop block area of the summit area. And we've had questions for a while, really ever since the 2018 collapse, how the release of gas through that rubble pile actually manifests, whether it comes out in one concentrated area, whether it diffuses through a larger area, through a variety of different kind of cracks. And so you can imagine that their motivation was just to continue that line of inquiry, to see if there's any gas leaking out anywhere else in a crater floor that maybe there's some new pathway to make sure we're not missing a measurement, that we're not measuring in the wrong place, and we're measuring all the places that it needs to be measured. They're measuring the places that need to be measured, right? They're the warriors going out there and getting all stinky in all these gas vents, and did that when I was a volunteer, and it's an underappreciated job, I'll tell you that. So there's the gas mapping mission here on Kilauea. And the caption shows here that they're on a down-drop block that subsided during the 2018 collapse. And the cliff face formed during this collapse, really. So, this is the original caldera floor up here. So this is how much it's down-drop, and they're down on this area that they know has moved and cracked to check on the gas emissions from this area right in there. So they do say there are 2 HVO geologists seen as tiny spots in the lower left portion of the photograph in the steaming area to give a sense of scale. So I'm going to have to click through here to show you guys them, since you will never see this if you're looking on a smaller screen here. But they are actually right down in here. And so I'm going to zoom into there. And there you can see one right there. And the other one is up here in this corner. You can move that other person further on screen here. They're 1 and 2. And that gives you an idea, if I were to scroll it up now, the size of these boulders that are down here at the bottom of this cliff, and the size of this cliff itself. And it may appear to not be that big from this perspective of a photograph, but the people are that big right down in there. So that's the view of the one of the target areas for gas mapping mission there. There's also helicopter overflights. So here is an aerial view of the inactive lava lake. The west vent is over here in this area. There's that large island, the big island, that's buried, and the north vent remains. That cone is right in there, still visible right there. So not a lot of changes. Interesting to see it in different light. What we're seeing mostly the changes nowadays is a continued gradual buildup along this northern margin here of quite a bit of sulfur. And this view is nice because we can see a little bit of the southern wall and see that there is actually some sulfur buildup there as well. Slightly different colors, maybe slightly different intensity or composition perhaps, but it looks a little more similar up here in this western area. So interesting to see those kind of changes as one of the only things that we see changing on Kilauea surface now. It's not typically the case. Normally we see all kinds of things on Kilauea surface changing, with the last few years being unusual in that sense, right? Especially the first year after the collapse, and then of course we had the pond of water coming into it, and that was something that kept our attention until the lava came into it at the end of last year. So interesting to reflect on those changes there. And that's that current view there. They do say here in a caption, The very top of the cliff is about 1165 feet above the surface of the lava lake. So let me go back into that. Talking about up here, probably this cliff up here, all the way down to there, about a little less than 1,200 feet, 355 meters. Learn that from the caption there. And a wide-angle view, similar, but worth showing you guys since it is very picturesque to see our dramatic volcanic landscape, you know, whenever that is. And here you can see that nice wider view. There's that innermost pit with that frozen lava surface. Still liquid on the inside. It's going to be liquid on the inside for a long time. And then we see that lowest downdrop block over here in the west, and then we see the larger downdrop block in the east over here. And kind of have this other piece in between. It's this little mezzanines, more or less area. There's been other craters that have had areas called mezzanines, and this is what this reminds me of, and not that I've heard anyone else call it that yet. So that's the wide view there, and you can see up here the crater rim drive where it's truncated going down into the crater, right? So there's an area back in here. That's or maybe more back over in somewhere back in here. The killer well that's been measured before for water depth, and that's our data point for water studies. And so I bring that up because there is a photograph of that coming up as well too, so give you some orientation on where that's going to be. All right, so that's our wide-angle view there. And you see the series of collapses. Let's move on here. All right, this one, Volcanic Gas Survey. So once again, you can see the geologists in this field of sulfurous deposits on the floor of the crater here. If this is where I believe it is, from my perspective, this is an area that was steaming, that steams quite a lot, and was steaming quite a bit in those first few weeks post-collapse. And so it's interesting it would be interesting to hear what the findings are, not just whether there's any gas coming out, but its traces and then the composition of these minerals that are depositing here as well, if we get that information at some point in time. As far as what our caption can tell us, it does say here, the caldera-wide ongoing gas survey will be compared to gas surveys done in the area prior to the 2018 collapse events, and will reveal any changes in Kilauea summit gas pathways and emissions. This is a different area than I imagined, actually. This is a south silver bank, exposed in 2018, and visible as a white-colored walls in the background of the photograph. Yeah, so the south silver bank right over here. So this is kind of below that Kaunakakoa overlook area. When you're at the Kaunakakoa overlook, which is on the south side of Kilauea caldera in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, and you look at the landscape, you can see, you're looking from way above here, but you can see this part of this south silver bank cliff here. This is an area that was not visible for much of the last century, after having been visible the previous century and being buried by lava flows. So that's an interesting area right over there. And yeah, also very, very fractured. Not the area I was thinking of, a very similar process there as well. So that's the gas survey. The gas survey is interesting. You know, there haven't had any new emission reports, any numbers come out, but that is what we have so far here. All right, so more of the gas mapping effort here. Two scientists, that says here that they're walking transects along the downdrop portion of Kilauea caldera floor as part of the gas survey. And you might say, well, just walking around, how are they surveying gas? But they're actually carrying on their backs a multi-gas instrument, and that's measuring the amount of CO2, SO2, water vapor, and hydrogen sulfide via an inlet hose oriented towards the ground surface. So it looks like there's a little hose right in there, and that's what they're sucking the gas in and measuring it. Let me see if I can zoom in on that for you guys. So that might be a strap. Can we see one in here? No. So I mean, the hose isn't really visible. But you can see that this is a hard plastic pelican case style enclosure here that their instruments in, and they must have a little entry for the access for the gas down here somewhere. All right, so they do say these measurements will provide a map showing the areas that therefore where specific volcanic gases are being emitted in concentrations, and the light-colored ground they're walking on is evidence of such gases interacting with and altering the darker volcanic rocks in the area. So yeah, that's a good thing to note there, USGS caption. All right, there's only a few more of this gas survey, but it's something that, we want to make sure that we cover here, because that's what's this time in between lava effusion on a volcano is important for the HVO scientists. This is kind of work that they're conducting here. So here's someone's got they're sucking in some gas from this fumarole, sampling the gas, identified as emitting elevated levels of CO2 on a down-drop block. So that's interesting. There's somewhere where there's a little extra CO2 coming out, and the CO2 is obviously very important for determining the ratio of fresh, hot magma coming from depth into the volcano compared to the stuff that's been sitting around a little bit longer. So it will be later analyzed, and they note that they wear all kinds of safety gear, and it's in the area of the park that's closed there.
Doesn't the CO2 also give a little bit of snapshot on the resupply rate, or a little bit of information on that?
Right, so that's that long-term deeper source, deeper supply, yeah. And the reason being because the CO2 will bubble out of the magma at a lot deeper than the SO2. So it comes out sooner. It can come out on its way up before it parks itself and sits for a while and then moves around. And so that's what we're interested in. Is that exactly that? Is it going to park itself before it moves around? So all right. Let's see here. Oh, too far. That's that last image for the 22nd. We have an image from the 23rd, just a single one here, and this is a HVO geologist conducting maintenance on an S1 camera here. So the S1 camera on the southern rim of Halemaʻumaʻu there. No other information to note there. You can kind of see here. Because it's interesting that you got that equipment. You can see what their model of webcam, the S1 camera model looks like. It looks like that, right? It's an enclosure, a little enclosure, plastic enclosure with an antenna. It's got a little solar panel down here. You can see everything's held down by the rocks. It must be really windy there at some points in time, because you see everything is weighted down or tied down. Even the tripods are most of the way buried in rocks here. Imagine right above the top of that bluff. And they're pointing down and trying to look over that bluff into the pit without getting shaken by the wind. So that's a tricky thing to manage. I'm not quite sure what this is. If you have any ideas, Dan, jump in here. But you can see that they tied a little string to these two devices here to make sure they don't blow in either. But it's not quite clear what kind of sensors they are exactly. Looks like they're pointed towards that west vent area. So we'll see. Hard to tell from here. What other data sets come out in the future. That's the S1 camera. And to remind you guys, that's this camera over here on the south rim. This is the view that we looked at quite a lot during the eruption from the south, where we have a west vent on our left over here. And that lava lake was occupying most of this west area over here. So that's one camera. So one last photograph here. This is from a couple days ago on Tuesday, July 27th, and field work at Kīlauea, which I just mentioned, that location for you guys here. And you can see there's a gigantic tape measure that they're lowering down this hole to see how far down it is to the water. So that's interesting to us because we've tracked that movement of water, and another data point after the events of 2020 certainly would be insightful. So yeah, you can see there's some other wire here as well. I'm not sure if they're to what other degree they've sampled this well. They've in the past measured other factors as well, right? Temperature and among other things as well. So we will once again eagerly await this teaser from the USGS of what that measurement actually is. They tell us that they did measure it, and they tell us how deep the well was. Still is when it was originally drilled, but they don't tell us that what the measurement is right there. And perhaps there's some correction and work to be done before that can be made public. So we will eagerly await that when it is ready. So that is the imagery there, and we will turn here to our most recent live view from the KW camera, and really no change there, just showing you guys a time-lapse of the last 24 hours as we often do. Still no glow at night. Still just the shadows of the clouds blowing across the surface. That's really all you see in here. We'll switch to the thermal. The thermal isn't showing a whole lot of change either. It's still that same range of about 200 degrees max range and same persistent glowing spots, right? And so some of these spots, they're still glowing. It's likely a vent for the heat from that larger body trap below, and so there's like little chimneys, not just for whatever was immediately here, but now they're probably allowing the entire underground magma body, I suppose you could call it now, since it's back underground, allowing that entire body to release its heat through those cracks in those particular vents or chimneys there. No change really there. Looking at deformation in Kilauea, here's our plot for the last 2 days, and it's fairly steady up with a conspicuous up and down marker yesterday evening. And if you guys are watching from anywhere on island or anywhere around the Pacific Rim, you may be aware of that 8.2 Alaska earthquake which occurred yesterday. It caused a tsunami watch here in Hawaii until the data came in to show that the waves were not going to be threatening. So the locals here on Hawaii Island had an interesting evening last evening, kind of a late evening, as we awaited the eventual cancellation of that tsunami watch as the data came in from Alaska. So big earthquake. Wiggled the ground back and forth here. This is like a long period kind of thing. Teleseism officially is the term used for these distant earthquakes that register here nearby. And so normally you'd call it that for a seismogram. The tiltmeter is not exactly the same thing, but we're kind of using that term by analogy here. That's the most interesting thing on a meter in the last 2 days. Let's scroll down to the last week here, and you can see there is that same signal on the right. And you see we've been steadily coming up with a little bit of wiggle up and down, really, for the last 4 days now. And really before that, we didn't change a whole lot. In fact, our scale on the tilt here is going from +2 to -1.5, only 3.5 microradians in total. So it really started at 0, went to -1, went back up to +1.5. So really a net of 1.5 in the last week. Not a whole lot. Technically inflating, but it seems on a tilt to be doing it more slowly, at least as it's visible on this Uekahuna station, which is this northernmost station. And so we also have heard that there was a pattern of shifting inflation to the south of the caldera, the southern part of the caldera. And if that's the case, this instrument may be slightly less sensitive to that. And maybe the trend is more important than the magnitude at this point in time. So it's still inflating, and that's supported by the GPS we'll look at shortly here. But to put it in perspective, here's the whole last month, back to the end of June here. So you can see we had a lot of big deflation inflation events end of last month, and you can see we had one earlier in the last 2 weeks, but really we've seen those seem to phase out, and we haven't had any deflation inflation events really in a while, one in the last 2 weeks combined. Right? So that's interesting. It's hard to really pin anything definitive on that. There is that study by Kyle Anderson that does try to look at the statistics of the frequency of deflation inflation events preceding eruptions, and maybe marginally you're more likely to have an eruption when you don't have deflation inflation events, when they actually pause. So that's an interesting thing to note here. It can stay paused for a long time before that happens. That's one of the patterns they saw. But at this point in time, especially since we saw in 2020, the end of 2020, the eruption that we just finished watching, did everything it did through persistent deflation inflation events, and so that pattern did not hold true the most recent time. So that's the caveat there, and that's why we mention it, but maybe not, and just something to talk about. You can never say anything convincing either way. It may be another data point to include in the analysis in the future, and we're just kind of watching it develop in real time here. So that's the tilt for the past month. We're now switch to GPS. Here's the extension across the summit caldera. And you see that the most important thing is, really that trend that we've had is fairly unchanged, right? That overall, on average, still expanding, extending, spreading apart. And you see we had this little variation because we had that possible shift to the south and then correcting itself there to its previous trend, right? We have this fairly stable trend, and really tight here at the end in the last month here, really very steadily going up, spreading apart. So you can say that that's the strongest evidence, along with that consistent elevated seismicity, that the magma is still coming into the volcano, even with a slightly smaller tilt signal there. And while we're at it, we can compare it a little bit. I mean, in the build-up to the eruption back in 2020, we had quite a bit steeper coming in both to that intrusion in late November, early December, and we also had quite a bit steeper leading to the eruption on December 20th. Right, so we're steeper, in fact, to the build-up before those times. We're in between the lead-up to 2020 and then the actual 2020 itself. So it's a little bit of a gray zone, really. Do we need to go to this steepness to actually pop it back out again, or now that we have perhaps widened pathways and deforming ground, is that rate of expansion going to be sufficient to, or we're going to see it curve upwards and get steeper? Right, that's the real question here: is what might come next? Does it go up? Does it go up? Does it keep going the same? And only time will tell. So that's the bottom line takeaway message: is it is still spreading because magma's coming in. All right, we'll move on down in the East Rift Zone. Pu'o'o, fairly stable, fairly flat, small scale, nothing changing there. I'm gonna keep it quicker for you guys on that here. All right, we'll show you guys a couple other interesting things here. It's a graph of the depth of Halemaʻumaʻu lava lake. And we've talked about these variations, and we're gonna just talk past that and look at this average trend here, which is a steady down, except that more recently, within the last week, it seems to have accelerated a little bit, at least in this area of measurement. So that's interesting. And why might I be doing that right there? And is this anything to be worried about? Well, nothing to be worried about, really. We got to remember that the entire surface of the lava lake is crusted over, but it's liquid underneath its entire core. So there could be shifting centers as the magma is cooling, as the gas migrates and escapes and flows out, and you can imagine there's going to be a different settling process across different parts of the lava lake at different times. And just to remind you guys of this without going into too much detail, here is a paper we brought up before from the 1965 Maka'apu'i lava lake, paper by Wright Okamura. And this is, I'm just going to show you guys two snapshots of many, right? And this is just contours of how much it was subsiding in those months following the eruption. And the center is over here. This is showing July to September of 1965. So I'm over here, and I'll just show you guys one other snapshot from 9 months later. And now you can see that area is not the center. There's other centers, maybe over here, maybe over here. So you can see that the patterns can change over time, and that's normal. That's normal and documented. And when we saw the image of the geologist measuring with a laser the different points on the surface of the lava lake, this is the kind of map that I'm hoping to see someday, is something along these lines for our current cooling crust of the lava lake. And that'll be cool when we get to see it. All right, so that's the lava lake surface. Let's look at the earthquakes a little bit more closely. This is the last week of earthquakes. You can see we still have some of these deeper earthquakes underneath the generally summit area, although really the whole bulk of the volcano through here. There's a couple still farther over, farther east, and the Pahala earthquakes are still at that same depth down in there as well. And the same pattern of having earthquakes concentrated around the summit and this upper East Rift especially as well. Upper East Rift connector perhaps, and to some degree a little bit to lesser amount on the this Middle East Rift between Maunaloa and Pu'o'o as well, right? That's kind of the area of magma injection we would expect, right? Kind of this leg being part of the magma chamber essentially, right? And potentially sending pulses into this Middle East Rift zone to fill that area. And the other thing that's manifested is all the earthquakes in the south flank, these reds and oranges and somewhat the yellows that are over here showing movement of this flank to accommodate that injection of magma along the rift zone up in here. So that's how the volcano works most of the time, and it's just a matter of how fast can it fill in compared to how fast can the flank get out of the way, and how fast can we move the magma to other areas of storage within the reservoir as that pressure and pathways evolve. So that's the interesting thing here. It's not been steady. It's been a little bit sporadic. I'm going to scroll down here to the rates and depth for the past week. We don't usually look on the past week, but you can see here in this one past week plot of accounts that the second half of the week was more active than that first half of the week, right? And just a random chance this week. But you can see here on this cross-section depth versus time that the earthquakes are concentrated mostly in that shallower zone in the magma reservoir areas, and you can see here a little flurry of them, and another little flurry of them, and another little flurry of them, with a little bit of lulls in between, a little bit more here at the end, right? But certainly times before that where you didn't see nearly that much activity. So it's elevated seismicity, but it's not constant, right? It's not constant like we would expect in the days leading up to the eruption. We're not seeing that yet, right? So we're still in that kind of weeks, potentially weeks out phase. So that's the pattern within the past week. And let's look at the past month here. Here is the earthquakes over the past month. You see a little bit more population of those same patterns. You see a little bit more of that summit area right through here. You see more of this Namakani Payo campground earthquake areas here. You see a little bit more of this southwest rift of the summit area, maybe even a little bit of this upper southwest rift, right? The actual structural southwest rift, and then what's called the seismic southwest rift. We'll touch on that a little bit later as well. And you see that the south flank is clearly mobile all the way down to Highway 130, that area of magma injection, and possibly slightly beyond that, right, back to the area of Leilani. Not that there's any reason for concern that we can see as of right now. You can see that really this pattern of seismicity on a rift zone goes all the way up to Pu'u'o, and it pretty much stops right there, right? There's really a whole bunch of nothing, right? This is little ones are just background, so a whole bunch of nothing in the rift zone east of Pu'u'o as it currently stands, and no signs of change there. Okay, so we're almost through Kilauea Signals here, and I wanted to point out here, here is these depths. You can see that there's a cluster of them somewhere in a range of 25 kilometers down to 45 kilometers down, and you see these are the ones near the summit region right through here. Correspond to that quadrant right in there. But you do see other ones over here on the flank as well, over here to the east. And these are interesting and a little less easy to explain, but we'll talk about what's been published here next. Right after I review these earthquake counts. So you can see for the whole last month here that we are actually fairly steady elevated earthquakes here. And I'll come back to the long-term pattern. Well, maybe we'll come up here and click on the data for the past year. And see a lot of earthquakes over the past year. And what I really want to look at is this year-long plot of earthquake rates and depths. And so you can see here we are, still elevated above what was during eruption time, similar to that elevated background before the intrusion and eruption, which were excess above this background, and that's the next phase we would look for, is an excess of earthquakes above this background level. And so right now we're having a good amount of earthquakes, but it's essentially maintaining this elevated background. Right. So to discuss these deeper earthquakes right through here, I pulled out one paper in particular I want to share with you guys. This is by Wright and Klein, 2006, and deep magma pathways to Kilauea here. And so there's a couple different things I'm going to just pull out of here to show you guys. One is starting at the more shallow part of the volcano, right? So these are it's all black and white images. You can see here summit caldera region with plot of the earthquakes. And they're actually examining in particular these long period earthquakes, which are more characteristic of vibration of movement of fluid. So in theory, if you have repeating long period earthquakes in particular areas, you might imagine that those are areas of magma transport. And that's what we're trying to get at here, is where the magma pathways, down deeper in Kilauea. So the surface pattern looks like that. And you look at depth, you can see here's Halemaʻumaʻu right over here, and you can see that there's outline an area of less earthquakes. That's thought to be that larger reservoir area, so the magma chamber, if you will, or whatever incarnation of that you believe in, right? reservoir, whether it's a network of dikes and sills or one giant egg-shaped body, who knows, right? That's where we're limited in our understanding. And you can see that below that, you see another zone of low-period earthquakes that seem to fall within a band right through here, right? And so let's imagine that this is the actual pathway up into that shallow chamber area, and has a pathway that's not exactly vertical, pretty close. It's leaning a little bit towards the end of the line that's marked as B. Right, is where the upper end is. So the upper end is over here, B is at the bottom, and the lower end is back over here. So it starts deeper, probably underneath right in here, and it moves shallower underneath the South Caldera chamber back over here. South Caldera chamber somewhere over here. Here's Kauai. And then as it comes shallower, it goes back towards the middle. So it's interesting how it has that little bit of a structure there. And we're looking at the depths here, 0, 5, 10, 15, down to 20 kilometers, right? So we're still not in the range of those earthquakes that we just pointed out, but this is that part above it that we need to discuss first, right? So that's the part that was mapped. But there was one earthquake in particular that occurred in 1994, and that occurred in an area close to the shoreline, right? But it was down around 35 kilometers deep, right? Similar to these patterns that we have now. So south of the caldera, here's our caldera, and here's a pattern of these earthquakes south of the caldera that are deep. So similar to what we're seeing now, this might be the context that we're looking for right in here. So if we scroll down, what we're just looking at fits in this upper section right in here, right? This pattern into Halemaʻumaʻu, that south caldera, shallow caldera, because we're starting our depth here at 10. 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So we were seeing earthquakes just this week between 25, there might have been one that was down at 45, somewhere in there, right? But the blue ones are essentially in here, and the purple ones would be down in here. And so you see that south of the caldera, there's this whole area that it mapped the one earthquake with an unusually large number of aftershocks, all these long period events, that they think is outlining to them the shape of what was a vibrating magma chamber, magma storage area deeper down at that point in time, right? So you can see that it centers more or less around 30 kilometers down. That's that same depth as those Pahala earthquakes. Interesting. That seems to be that one of those magic depths within the crust where the magma likes to sit. And part of that has to do with, I'll pull up this next slide here from that paper. Part of that has to do with the fact that there is a phase transition in the mineralogy of the peridotite, the olivine-rich chemistry of magma that's down there. So you actually have a transition between a chemical transition here, and I'm sorry, a mineralogical transition right through there. And it may be that boundary is being utilized by this magma pathway as well. So their preferred path, focuses on, there's a cluster of earthquakes down here in this 45, 50 deeper range that are offset even further to the south, right? And this might be that edge of that deepest feeder source. It comes up to that 30K depth, and there it flattens out, it moves towards the north, and then it comes up again more vertically at that point in time. And once it gets up here, it might do a little bit of wiggle back and a little bit of wiggle like that kind of thing. Right? But that's essentially your magma pathway there. And on a map view, it looks like coming from offshore to mostly to the north, slightly east, slightly northeast, but mostly to the north. That's the pathway of magma mapped by that one event and its aftershocks back in 1994. So that's most of what I want to share. I'm going to share just one other aspect of this, which is that there are times when you do see deeper earthquakes more directly underneath that summit region, right? Similar to Kilauea Iki when we had that activation. So to put that on this plot over here, those earthquakes are falling over here sometimes, right? So what they're suggesting is that you must have multiple pathways, or this must be the dominant pathway right now, but there must be a secondary pathway that comes more straight up just from where it is right now. So what you're seeing is a little bit of a split personality, where once in a while it wants to come up from here, and that one's coming up from over here. And this may have to do with the fact that we believe that the combined movement of the the plate that the island is on and the hotspot away from its previous track may be leading for this migration of this deeper source farther to the southwest than it has been before. So that might be a possibility of why you might have different input zones from deep into this 30K area, and you have transport along this 30K area, and then you have some pathway up, right? So the interesting thing is, we've now, I'm not going to bring it up here today, but we've now talked about, and I'd have to flip the graph around, that off to the Pahala direction, around that 30K depth, is also a zone of magma storage, we think also comes from depth and also accumulates. And so that has a potential also to be moving laterally all the way to here and joining this. You may actually have 3 possible pathways coming up from the deepest section, right? Kind of concentrated zones, and it collects in this little layer, and that all gets funneled over to underneath the caldera, and that's where it makes its way further up. So in the end, when we see these deeper earthquakes in the area right in here, we're essentially seeing that deepest pathway, and that's perhaps the most interesting thing that we can get out of that, right? Apart from saying that the island is always shifting and getting heavier and settling from its weight, and that's the weight that the settling earthquakes happen at, as we were talking about last week, was probably not quite the depth required. So I wanted to follow up on that and add that extra dimension that we can bring to you guys today. So here's our earthquakes map that's live. You can see, that's our Kilauea pattern. These are slightly higher thresholds with not as many dots on the map. And you see similar pattern there. Upper East Rift, and then Middle East Rift, South Flank, all through there. So I'm going to zoom out, and we can see there's our Pahala earthquake still occurring to our southwest. We still have a few earthquakes over here on this southeast flank of Maunaloa, right? But we're not seeing that in the USGS report. We're just seeing reports of still very low earthquakes around the summit region, and so that's certainly something we're seeing, a lack of earthquakes around the summit region there on Maunaloa. So pretty quiet on Maunaloa. Let me jump over here, show you guys. Oh, this is the last loop. Let's give it a reload here. This week's Maunaloa update, and you see 42 small magnitude earthquakes beneath the summit upper flanks of Maunaloa. So, and no other changes on the volcano in the meantime. While I'm showing the reports, let's make sure I cover our sources for Kilauea as well, which is also USGS weekly updates here. And just to make sure we don't miss anything in here, scan through it. There's no new SO2 value reported, although they did do that entire survey across the caldera floor, and that's probably why we're waiting for something more integrated and perhaps with more accuracy. We'll see. We'll see what comes out. We're going to get more gas data soon. We just don't have any new data point. And otherwise, I do say, no deflation inflation events, continued inflation by GPS instrument. The pattern has persisted for several months. They're not mentioning any longer that shift to the south of the caldera. So whether that has stopped or whether it's not normal, in either case, it's no longer any update. And otherwise, we do see East Rift zone observations a little bit different. Seismicity persisted along the Upper East Rift zone at slightly elevated levels over the past week. Together with genetic monitoring, the observations suggest that the summit and Upper East Rift zone continue to be replenished with magma. By contrast, the Lower East Rift zone was mostly quiet. I like that last sentence that they're starting to put that in there, at least once they put that in here. We like to focus on how it affects people living in Lower East Rift where the eruption just happened as well. So that's the text updates here. Let's come over to Maunaloa, and I might have to make sure my pages are refreshed here. This is the last week earthquakes at the summit, and we're showing 45. That's that kind of low number there, so really not a whole lot. Kind of low levels all around, not really clustered anywhere. Look for the last month, and even that is getting less populated as more and more weeks go by with lower activity here. Not load? No, I wanted to load halfway. Well, the map is only halfway today at this hour. So let's scroll down past that. We can look at the earthquake rates for the past month here and see that really we're still highly variable, and in fact variable enough to sometimes be getting down to close to 0 levels. And so we're still very low, dipping to almost nothing. And it's really extraordinary how quiet it's gotten on Mauna Loa, considering how much movement there was earlier in the last year and earlier this year. So to compare that, let's load the whole last year here on Mauna Loa. And in comparison to what we saw in the last week and the last month, the whole last year Mauna Loa looks a lot more active, of course. And here is probably the most easy to understand graph showing earthquake rates for the past year with earthquakes per week and time here in the bottom for the last year. So here we are at very low levels, lower than anything we've seen in any time in the whole past year. Right? We're more active with quite a lot of variation. With a lot of change early in the first part of this year, and then really we're tailing off here, which is really interesting thing to see here. Okay, so as far as the GPS, here's our GPS length. Still some little wiggles, but largely unchanged and within that variation we've seen. So you can see that our very flat range is somewhat that big. So there we are. Maybe we've gone down slightly. Maybe there's a little bit of an arc through here, but it's really fairly minor considering the scale of this and the changes we've seen earlier in the record. Okay, so that is the Mauna Loa part of the update here, and we will take a pause here to say our thank yous. Yep. I do want to do the Volcano Watch here as well, and so let me do that just real quick before we do the questions. The Volcano Watch this week, today, is the radar plume here. So this is fantastic. It's posted on hawaiitracker.com already if you guys want to read it in more detail. And you can see that there was an original webcam on a Gemini observatory on Mauna Kea that caught views of this eruption beginning in 2020, and it caught this massive steam plume as it blew across the landscape there. Right, and so what they've done is they've used the radar scans during that time to construct a 3D visualization of that plume at a time. Right, so here's that view from Mauna Kea. And while we're looking at the Mauna Kea view, let me just pull up here this little video clip that we annotated from one of our earlier update videos of this plume cloud. So this is that same view. It's a time lapse here. So the summit's going to come into view here, and the eruption is going to be over here with a glow and a cloud coming through. So it's a very short clip, only a few seconds. So I'll show you guys that here now. Here's the steam cloud blowing away. It only lasts an hour and a half. Then you just see glow and clear skies after that. I'll do it for you guys one more time. There it goes. And so that's that little, like one just smoke signal flying across the Pacific there, sent from Kilauea. Not technically smoke, I know. It's nothing was burning or igniting there. But just making the reference there. All right, so yeah, this article, maybe could have mentioned, is written by Ryan C. Cahalan here from Cascades Volcano Observatory this week. And so sharing some of this broader research here. And so they talk about the radar, different uses within meteorology, but also their use in volcanic plumes, whether they're explosive plumes where you might have ash, or vapor plumes where you might have droplets that you can then try to use to scatter. So here's another image. Let's show you guys this one. Right, the actual visual photograph taken from HVO, the radar image from the southern part of the island, not quite South Point, but in the southern part of the island here, showing that area over the summit. There's that cloud with the reds showing that thickest, densest areas, and the yellows slightly lower than that, and the greens slightly lower than that, and the blue slightly lower than that. That's the scale over here. And so then they can use that to reconstruct, looking over the crater, right, what that radar might have actually looked like. This is a visualization with that, the redder parts inside the yellower parts, inside the greener parts, etc., etc. Right, so that's one cool thing to see. And so this is just one snapshot, right? Every time the radar scans, they have tens of these per hour. So you can, in theory, animate this and show a whole progression over an eruption. And that might matter for if you're trying to see where the fallout might go in particular communities downwind. It could also matter for the science, as far as you'd like to sample some of the rock that got thrown up on that particular blast. You can go and see where most of it landed and go and sample that area. So pretty cool stuff. Useful not just in Hawaii, but something we're interested in seeing even more further in Hawaii. The question I had, Dane, to kind of preview our switch into questions here, the question I had is whether this has been done for the 2018 eruption, since we saw quite a bit of weather phenomenon from that or that as well. Have you seen anything?
No, I haven't, but I was thinking that when I saw this, that they would have had to prepare beforehand to know what to expect to be able to deploy it. So I was thinking that they got the idea in 2018 or developed it in 2018, not pre-2018, but while the ongoing eruption or after it. And now we're get to see the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, it could well have been developed since then, since it's all new technology. But I think that they are taking radar measurements straight from NOAA, which is free online to anyone. They do talk and hear about that, and maybe the archive doesn't go back, and it's harder to find an archive if you weren't doing it live. Like let's say if it's more than 3 months, so it's harder to search. I don't know. I haven't looked to see, but that's a possibility as well.
Right. Yeah, it's cool research.
Yeah, for sure.
Near real time, anything near real time monitoring is great. It's the stuff where we just got an INSAR archive that we were going through from 6 months ago, and it's like, yeah, this is great, but what's happening now?
Yeah. We'll share that with you guys next week. We won't have quite as much to talk about since our Southwest Rift and Kauai segment is going to be fairly in depth here. In depth in the sense where it's going to take a little while, even though I'm going to try to not keep it complicated for you guys there. So. But first,
all right. Well,
yeah,
go ahead. So we do have a $20 donation super chat on the YouTubes from Judy, who says, "Enjoy your work. We appreciate your support."
Mahalo, Judy.
But before we go into it, I do want to challenge me a little bit there. What is this image? So can you pull that?
All right.
Back up, maybe. All right. So I tried to blow up the image and see what the writing on the back of them were. And you can see, you can't really see that much, it's all blurry, but you can see two little markings on it. First one is a marking from the European Union, which is just conformity standards for electronics. But the second one is a FC logo, I think, which is an FCC compliance logo, which would lead me to believe what I'm going to suggest it is. But first, look at how it's actually displayed that equipment. It's not new. It's been there a while. It stays over time. They've tied it to a rock. They don't care about it that much. They're willing to let it basically fall off the tripod, go into the caldera, pull up the rope, and reattach the things. Right. The warning on it, though, the FCC one, includes a lot of different types of LEDs. So that's kind of what I'm thinking they are. Is they're just some simple generic hazard lights that have that plastic for field usage, something along those lines. Nothing really that fancy, especially since there's no hookups to them. They're just free floating standalone devices, it looks like to me. So yeah, I'm going with lights, and they're just positioned right by that camera. I don't know when they turn them on or anything like that, but that'd be my guess. Yeah, just wanted to get that out of the way.
Good suggestion. Yeah, I did consider that. We have seen sometimes in the evenings a little bit of light in the foreground of that webcam image too, right? So I consider that maybe it would be light, and maybe that's something to help the camera do what it's supposed to. I'm not sure. Something we can ask them sometime.
And we know that light, there is light on that camera, because when it rains, you can see the raindrops going across that light. So I think it's light. So with that, we can go into our thank yous. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. Best way to support this channel is just to like, subscribe, and share this content on your own social media platform, whatever your favorite one is. That really helps it get out there, this type of information. get some real reporting or some real expert advice on what the volcanoes are doing. We appreciate it, Phil. You can also go to hawaiitracker.com, and we post everything there. So chronological order on when we post, and you can make a membership there as well. It's all free, and even submit posts through a review process. So check us out there. We do have a couple sponsors that we want to thank for helping us provide this type of content. The first one is Kaleo's Bar and Grill in Maharapahoa. They do some unique twists on some traditional dishes, a little bit of a local flair on them. Indoor, outdoor dining, takeouts, always convenient and reasonably priced. Great place to go, great service. So if you're visiting or just local and need someplace new to go or have been there in a little while, go check them out. We appreciate them. Second one is Kalani Tours. Kalani Tours does some more intimate tours with smaller groups and educational, culturally enriching tours. They do Pono tour services, trying to keep the tourists from getting in issues in areas that they might not understand. And that's actually pretty important. There's lots of reports about, people visiting that don't know the landscape and make some mistake and get themselves hurt, need a rescue or things like that. So these guys will look out for you. They do waterfall tours, volcano tours, and a Kona coffee farm tour. So yeah, check them out. We appreciate both our sponsors. We're also brought to you partially by a grant, the Puna Strong grant from the
Hawaii Community Foundation.
Hawaii Community Foundation.
And the County of Hawaii.
We appreciate them, the County of Hawaii. And we appreciate them to, step in and support this type of content. So we really appreciate everybody that makes this possible.
Yeah, mahalo everyone, mahalo.
Somebody's commenting that there's prime rib on Friday at Kaleo's. So yeah, good stuff. So let's get into some questions, huh?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so don't have that many lined up right here, but I'm going to read this one verbatim. When peridotite undergoes a phase change at 30 kilometers depth, does it affect any of the characteristics of the magma, like viscosity, density, or temperature? This one's from Bill on YouTube.
Thanks for the question, Bill. I'm not an expert in that in particular. I haven't looked at all the details. I'm sure that there are effects. What I can say is what was cited in this paper that I presented to you guys, and they do say that the transition is from spinel peridotite to plagioclase peridotite, and they say that it may help to focus the fault planes. So like there's a transition there. There's like essentially a boundary that exists, and if that helps influence the magma path like a fault would, then that could be what's allowing the transport path to be that in that way. Yeah, they do say that they're not 100% convinced. They do propose an alternative of having a more frothy, turbulent magma that's just rising its way up, and then it hits that area, and then maybe there's a density difference there, and then that density difference or something along those lines allows it to migrate laterally at neutral buoyancy without changing buoyancy before it then comes back up. So those are the two things that they propose. I can't tell you exactly without having the familiarity with those peridotite properties at that temperature and depth. Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of geologists that do. So I'll see if I can find any more on that for you guys. Yeah, but certainly imagine a density, and maybe not the temperature so much as like the with the melting points and those kind of things might actually matter, might actually change. Yeah, great question.
All right. Kelly asks, I wonder about the sulfur deposits. Does sulfur on Kilauea have any practical uses?
Practical uses. The deposits don't really form really thick, and they're normally like a crust on very glassy, rinded lava flows that are made of basalt. So it's very hard to get it by itself, is the first thing to say. And while there are some areas that's possible, there are very few in our Alto National Park, right? So there really is no such thing as sulfur mining, if that's kind of what you're getting at. That is done in other volcanoes in the world. That's not used here. the best I could offer is that people in this eastern Hawaii area of rainforest do deal with fungus and mold quite a bit, and sulfur has been promoted as a natural fungicide. And people do talk about the VOG having an antifungal effect when a volcanic gas blows through. So it's not so good for being around and breathing it, but it's actually good for it's like a natural fungus treatment. So that's really the benefit people put out when they look for a benefit around here. Yeah, unless you have something else, Dan.
I just had to Google to see like what are the practical uses outside of ours, because we don't do mining for sulfur on Kilauea, but Indonesia, they use it to make bleach sugar, make match heads and fertilizer, and then use it to process rubber as well. So they go in and harvest it and do a whole bunch of stuff, and it's pretty gnarly work, it looks like.
Yeah, they have a lot of it there, and it's a tourist attraction and all that, and it's backbreaking and
it looks
fantastic to imagine happening. Yeah.
Odd Boomer asks, was the 2018 the biggest collapse in recorded history for Kilauea?
Definitely not. It's hard to quantify some of the older ones because we just have some rough maps, but many of those maps show much larger areas of collapse than 2010. And probably the strongest geologic evidence is the caldera itself. The caldera itself dates back to some major collapse a long time ago, right? So the actual outer caldera walls, and so that's the biggest collapse we've had. If the whole caldera collapsed all the way out, then you would say, okay, that's about as big as it can get. And as it was, we saw maybe the western third got really deep. The middle third got slightly deeper, and the eastern third was unchanged. So it really, in the grand scheme of things, among caldera collapses on Kilauea, it was a smaller one. Yeah, which is shocking, I'm sure, because if you guys didn't get a chance, check out the video that Dan compiled of the USGS highlights of new drone footage of the summit during that collapse event. It's pretty fantastic to watch.
Right. All right. So next question is from Facebook. Michelle asks, are geologists and volcanologists able to go into the lava lake in Halemaʻumaʻu now to do measurements, etc.?
I have not seen any evidence of that. You can see that they're actually flying onto that down-drop block there and doing stuff there, but I don't think they've gone down onto the lava lake surface itself yet.
Right.
I would imagine that would be something that would be a good opportunity for media, and we haven't seen anything like that.
Yeah, that would definitely make the news if they did go down there. So I know probably they want to, but being able to with the bureaucracy and everything is probably a different question altogether.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they're leaning on the expertise of the helicopter pilot. Maybe there's someone in the audience who can chime in on this as well. But it's probably harder to fly into a smaller, narrow, deep hole than that is to fly into a wider shelf where you have more exits in case there's a gust of wind. Like there's different areas. Whereas if you're flying straight into that bottom thing and the gust of wind comes and pushes you down, next thing you know, you got a bunch of debris in the bottom of the crater. Right? We wouldn't want that.
Right. I think that'll do it for the questions that I have so far. We'll do one more Q&A session at the end. Now we'll get into the little side bits that Phil has prepared.
Yeah, just this last one, which is a segment on the Southwest Rift and Kauai. And so we'll start off by talking.
Taking a lot of prep time on this one. This one's not an easy concept for to put together and showcase. So a lot of work went into this presentation Phil's about to drop.
Now there's several of these that we're trying to bring to you guys once in a while as we can compile more and more research and dig deeper into it. But that definitely takes more time. And this is a topic that's interesting to me with the recent earthquake patterns, and I think you guys will find some interest in this as well. And it'll probably set the scene for some future discussions. And when things happen, we can refer back to this summary. I try to make it a summary of the Southwest Rift in Kauai. And so I'm going to show you guys on this map, USGS map of lava flows from Kilauea since 1790. The summit's right in here. And the southeast rift is this whole thing over here, and all these colored blobs or lava flows coming off of the rift zone. So you can see a lot of lava flows off of the east rift zone, and that's what we talk about most of the time, is that or the summit. So we're not going to do that today. We're going to focus instead on this other area. This is the southwest rift over here, right? And there's an area in between the two right through there, and that's the Kauai fault zone right through there. And we'll see better images of this so far. But I wanted to first just point out this distribution of lava flows on the volcano. You see, obviously a lot in the summit, which with the caldera and things filling in, layering over themselves in the depression, you don't see quite as much variation as you do on the east rift, but these are the more active areas. The southwest rift does have quite a few lava flows on it as well, but there's a lot less that's known on them than we do for the southeast rift. So I'll show you guys, this is a clip from a paper by Dvorak and Zurison in 1993, and this is looking at the volumes of magma in the volcano. So it looks a little tricky. Let me break it down for you guys. So first focus on this. This is the key up here, this upper panel, right? This is the source of magma into the volcano from below. Here's a summit magma reservoir, of which some amount erupts onto the surface at the summit. Some goes into the east rift zone, can erupt in the upper rift zone, middle east rift zone, or the lower east rift zone. Or it can go to the southwest rift zone and erupt out of the southwest rift zone. So what they're showing here is of 100% of magma that comes into this volcano from below, and this is a period of time that spans from 1960 to 1989. So this does include that first beginning of the pool era, and it would be skewed even further today, since we've had a lot more east rift zone activity with nothing else anywhere else in much of that time. So this is a little bit dated, but it gives you some idea of that distribution. 100% of magma comes in. Of that, about the same amount is going all the way through to the rift zone. In this case, they say 106%. The reason why is because you actually have a deflation of the summit long term during this era. The summit's losing magma in the long term. It's feeding the rift zone. It's feeding some eruptions at the summit. But most of the magma coming into the volcano is going through to the rift zone, right? Where of what's coming in, 38% is being retained underground. And you have coming out of the Middle East rift zone by Pu'u'o area, 47% at the time. Now it'd be even higher. Coming out of the Lower East rift zone, only 5% of the volume. This is pre-2018. This would be higher. And out of this upper rift zone, 16%. This would be lower. And so, but that's more or less the proportions historically, right? So you can see that, roughly speaking, of what goes into the rift zone, maybe a third of it is being kept underground, and the rest is finding its way out somewhere. That's one interesting thing to take from this. But compare that to the southwest rift, right, where only 10% of the magma is going into that area in the first place. Of that 9% is being kept underground, and only 1% makes the surface in the southwest rift. This number would be lower now because of everything else going up on this side, right? So this is what I want to point out, is really this pattern of the southwest rift, where it doesn't get nearly as much magma, maybe a 1/10 ratio, 1 to 10 ratio between the southwest rift and the east rift. And of that amount, only 10% of it comes to the surface. So a lot of this is happening underground, adjustments underground. It's just one big difference to kind of start off with what's different between the southwest and the southeast. That explains the patterns we just saw on a map. So focusing on the southwest rift only, there are a few historically documented eruptions, and only a few. These 5 right here. 1823, which was William Ellis. He didn't actually see it happen, but he did hike across on the way up to Kilauea, the still cooling lava flow of 1823. We have a lot of other flows here between 1790 and 1815. 1815 and 1823. All these are things that are fairly recent science additions to our catalog, and there are no historical records of people witnessing these that we have linked to these as of yet, at least. Right? Maybe if you go back and look closer, and surely someone is, you might find something like that, but right now these are not anything we have any other information on besides the fact that they're there, and the carbon dating ages came back around then, right? We have to jump to 1868, which was a very small eruption. Just one little pad right in there, about that big. And then to 1919 and 1920, this was Mauna Iki, the largest southwest rift zone eruption in, well, I guess it was about a century ago now. I was going to say in the last century, but not quite anymore. A little over a century. And then we have a big gap before 1971, which starts up at the summit and propagates its way down a little bit here and then down across 1919. And 1974 was a little offset to the south, but that was the most recent southwest rift zone flow that was entirely outside of the caldera. And there are a lot of similar structures within the caldera, near the caldera, that have similar trends, but we're going to call all that caldera stuff and leave it apart from our discussion today. And so my goal isn't to describe how every eruption actually happened necessarily, like the full eruption, give you a recount of everything. That would take way too long. I'm going to focus instead on the dynamics of how we saw these eruptions actually happen, to understand how they might happen in the future, what might be necessary to cause this event, this pattern to reemerge. So let's go there and see where that takes us. Oh, wrong way. All right, so 1823 in the Southwest Rift, and I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. Over here, okay. 1823 in a Southwest Rift. Kilauea is the lava flow that William Ellis, the first Western missionary to the island of Hawaii, described. And he actually drew this sketch right here. And in this sketch, which is this map up here on the right from Hazlitt and Henman, you actually see that there is this inner depression, right, within that outer depression further out. I might need a different color. Huh? Let's change my color here. So an inner depression within that outer depression over there, yeah? So in the image here, you see that as this is the black ledge right through here. And this was interpreted as being essentially the high point of lava before it had just drained to go somewhere. And the conclusion was then, and we have no reason to change that now, is that this is what fed that eruption down on a Southwest Rift at Kilauea. So what we're seeing essentially is a pattern of there was magma, there was a lava within the lake at the summit, at very high elevation, as far, filling it to its highest point to that level, right, with this big ledge is over here. And then it quickly drained down to feed something downhill, and so that's why that's associated. This is a Google Earth satellite view of this eruption site. This is this big black feature all through here. Right, what you might be able to tell is that there's this crack. This is the Great Crack, the world famous, visible from the space shuttle, Great Crack of Kilauea. That's the surface manifestation of the extension of the Southwest Rift Zone. It runs all the way like that. Right? It's kind of off in the middle of nowhere. It's not the easiest to find and get to, but it's super long, and you actually, it's a very interesting feature there. And it appears like this lava flow came out of this crack. Right? You can kind of see that the pattern really comes out of that. It's interesting. The crack is there now, and the crack likely didn't stay a crack during the eruption, but since then there have been a lot of earthquakes. In particular, there's a big earthquake in 1868, just over that way, that we know caused eruption in 1868, as well as likely open this crack a little more as well. So this is one of this is the only one we have an example of in historic time to actually make it to the ocean in the Southwest Rift. So that's pretty rare, and but that shows you that essentially you can have a full lava lake at the summit, and it drains out through a crack all the way down to sea level. This is not. It's not too unlike what we saw in Leilani in 2018, where high lava lake at the summit, a big crack, and it drains down the crack. The difference is the structure underground of this rift. This crack is not nearly as deep as the East Rift Zone conduit, and I'll show you guys that as well. So you maybe didn't have quite as much space to feed quite as much lava. Maybe didn't quite induce that same level of summit collapse that we saw in 2018, and that's why it was different perhaps. But you would imagine that that's something to consider for the Southwest Rift as well. And maybe the underlying structure prevents it from doing that, and we'll talk about that here shortly. This is 1868 estimated area of ground movement and rupture, right? So this is Maunaloa up here, and Kilauea is down over here, and Mauna Kea over here. You can see that they believe that this entire southeast flank of Maunaloa, all the way to South Point, of which Kilauea and its east rift are part of it. That entire thing was what moved to generate what's considered a magnitude 7.9 earthquake in Waiohino here in this area on the south flank of Maunaloa. So you can see in red, this is the southwest zone eruption right in here. There's really not a lot of information on it apart from its location there. And there's also a small eruption near Kilauea, near Byron's Ledge area at the summit as well. So a couple of small things. Everything got so shaken up. There's unconfirmed reports of plumes of gas and fume rising from craters on the East Rift Zone. So it's unknown, no confirmed eruption on the East Rift Zone, but certainly there was big movement and likely some collapse, maybe some steam, and maybe there would have been something glowing if there would have been enough people to look for it. But really fascinating event, 1868, right there. So moving on to 1919. This one I'll spend a little more time on because we have more information and courtesy of Dr. Scott Rowland at UH Manoa, who presented this at After Dark in the Park. And I'm not going to go through everything once again because it's way too much, but let's talk about the initiation and the first stages of eruption, because I really want to explore this connection of the summit and its cracks going down the southwest rift and how that actually works, right? As part of Dr. Rowland and Duncan Monroe's paper here, they described different patterns that seem to indicate magma moving from the shallow storage area to the eruption site, also from the deep storage area to the eruption site, or sometimes the deep storage area to the shallow area to the eruption site, or or we'll see, right? But you can see that these are the elements involved. There's a shallow storage area, there's a deep storage area, and there's an eruption area, and there are pathways between all of them that bypass the other, right? That's the little I'm not sure, the triumvirate right there. Yeah. And here's a hand-colored series of photographs at the bottom of that 1919 eruption. Okay, so, well, we'll go back and just highlight this quote here. This is the key thing. I'll read it again, but Thomas Jagger was making reports of this eruption, and he described lava could be seen flowing southwest in a crack that ran from the rim of Halemaʻumaʻu to the eruption site on the first phase of eruption. So that was coming up here, but let me read you guys this series of patterns here, this first two phases of pre-eruption here. November 28th, accompanied by strong seismicity, the lava lake dropped 180 meters. That's what you're seeing right through here. Two cracks in the lower 120 meters of the southwest and northeast walls of the 180-meter deep pit were exposed. These cracks did not extend to the surface along the pit walls. However, a new fuming fissure opened on the caldera floor 100 meters southwest of the rim of Halemaʻumaʻu. That's the one that they're just describing there. So, to pause on the side here, right? They noted when the lava drained down to this lowest level, they saw those cracks in the pit down there. And they thought, oh, that's probably where the lava went, at the crack that I can see right there, right? It is concluded that lava drained into a cavity within the volcano, most likely into the fissures exposed in the walls of Halemaʻumaʻu. So that's what this image right here is showing. Lava lake draining into that crack, into this somewhere near the shallow storage area, right? For the next 17 days, actively fountaining lake surface arose, so they think that the deep storage came back in, pushed the shallow storage back, and refilled this, right? And it possibly could have been connected here and filling this as well, but it was blocked off at some point at the end there. Okay, so let's go to the next one. December 15th, right in here, lava could be seen flowing southwest in the crack that ran from the rim of Halemaʻumaʻu to the eruption site. As soon as the eruption in the caldera started, the lava lake in Halemaʻumaʻu began to drop. Extrusion ceased as soon as the lava level reached elevation of the vents, reflecting a simple hydraulic link between the lava lake and the nearby vents. That's this close vent in the caldera still, that first one, right? But we're seeing a crack open near the surface. We're seeing a crack open a little bit further down, right in here, right? We're seeing cracking in this direction as the pattern we're seeing here. But the lava level kept dropping afterwards. December 16th, the lake began to rise again at an average rate of 5 meters per day over the next 5 days. And it was during this rise in the lava lake level that cracks were observed propagating down the southwest rift zone. Some of these cracks contained lava, others emitted fume or steam, and others were just open fractures. In general, they formed successively in a downward direction at a propagation rate of roughly half a kilometer per day. And that's roughly a quarter mile or so. By 19th of December, cracks have propagated 9.5 kilometers to the southwest. That's what's that? Roughly 6 miles-ish to the southwest there. 5.9 miles or so. So the crack is expanding, right over here in this bottom frame. The crack is moved further over. It's about to erupt out of the surface right over here, right? We've seen cracking at a very shallow level, at a deeper level, and now at an in-between level. You can see really everything is cracking. And a crack would be in that vertical plane that we're looking at it on end, like this, but it actually is a thin blade in reality there. Okay, so one last thing to note here to kind of illustrate what's possible with these kind of crack systems. Between December 24th and January 17th here, stages 2A and 2B, a lot of lava coming out during these times. The dynamics involving the extended crack system suggest both the near surface and a deeper surface, deeper pathways for magma movement during different stages. So you can see here that during a stage 2A, they're drawing no evidence of influx of magma into the deep storage, right? It seems like it's stable there, steady there. And shallow storage feeding Maunaloa eruption. And then at some point, after not even a week, they see the magma bypassing the shallow storage area, moving through that crack next to the shallow storage area, and then coming up and out that way. So really, this is just to show how much cracking there actually is going on there, and how magma is really moving its way into the cracks there. The cracks are a big part of it. We'll talk about how forceful this is here in a few minutes. But first, let's look at this map of the crack system in 1919. So here's the caldera up at the upper right, and end of November. And you can see December 15th here, 21st, starts working its way down, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, successively further and further away. Right? And these are the areas of cracking and fissures of that eruption. And here is Eruption Map. Right? So there is lava that came out. It's this lighter colored gray right in here. That's what you're seeing here. Is a 1919, 1920 lava flow over here. And then this other one is a 71 over top of it over here. Right, so that's 1919. 71, I just showed you guys where that is, right, in relation. Right through there, that longer crack right through there, below Cone Peak. Right. So there it is, once again. And also, on this particular map is shown vectors of horizontal displacement. So you can see that there's actually, the ground is moving away from this fissure in both directions. And here's where we can talk about whether this was a forceful injection or something more passive, because if we're seeing the sides get pushed away that much, then you're likely having magma injecting into there. So you might have some, you might be taking advantage of the crack system that's there to start off, to start wedging the magma or lava in there. But at some point, the magma is actually injecting itself in there with force, because likely it's so close to the summit area. The summit area builds a lot of pressure, and when a pressure can work its way in the crack, you're going to actually have forceful injection by pressure into these cracks, and you can have crack systems and injection together, which is a little different than a Kauai we'll talk about in a little bit here. So 74 is the last one on the southwest rift before we turn to Kauai, and you can see here's a 71, here's a 74. It was outside the caldera. There's other 74 eruptions, and here they are in the caldera. We'll leave those for a different day. But the 74 eruption from fissures A through I down in here sent flow down that reached down to not quite 2,000 feet elevation, having started up above 3,500 or so. So 74 eruption of Southwest Rift. So I've highlighted out from a paper by Wendell Duffield here some of the important things of the patterns in the Southwest Rift. And maybe I'll focus first on the image here at the bottom. Right, you guys have been shown this before. We've shown you this before. Cross section of the volcano, that lower chamber right down in here, upper chamber right through here. Our east rift zone is right through here. Right. Our southwest rift zone has got a funny thing here. The volcanic southwest rift zone, structural rift is shallower, between 1 and 2 kilometers depth. And what's called a seismic southwest rift is closer to 3 kilometers depth. And it's separate, right? It's detached from that shallower structure. And to really see this well, you have to look on this map view over here. And so here you see that summit caldera area, and you see the volcanic southwest rift is further north and off and shallower, and then further south and deeper is a seismic southwest rift connected to this south caldera deeper magma chamber, right? As we imagine that the east rift likely also is to some degree as well, right? Possibly with shallower connections into it as well. So that's the pattern there. The first thing to notice there is this difference between the two, right? So he notes here that the east rift essentially has that deep core and the shallow rift, one on top of the other. And so that deeper fluid core can act as a transport region, and it could also feed eruptions from deeper that come straight up from that 3 kilometers depth all the way up to the surface in that area. That's hard to do in a southwest rift, because at 3 kilometers depth, you're not in the same spot as you would be in the shallower part of the edifice there, right? So that's the interesting thing there, how those are actually detached, right? So the east rift, you have that deep rift and a shallow rift stacked, and in the southwest rifts, they're actually torqued apart. They're torqued apart, right? The summit, the shallow area going further north, and then a deeper area going further south, right? And that's part of the dynamic that's different in the southwest rift, and maybe why it can't feed magma from the summit down to that 1823 crack quite as easily, perhaps. Just ideas here, speculation, because we're just trying to pattern match, and that's largely what we how we try to gain insight on the volcanoes, since we don't have all the lab equipment to analyze chemistry and all the other stuff like that. So no seismic data suggests a comparable fluid core beneath the southwest rift. That's one big difference of the rift zones that's worth noting here. As far as patterns, number 1, eruptions were immediately preceded by and may have been contemporaneous with eruptions in the summit caldera. In some instances, the level of contemporaneous lava lake in the caldera subsided as though partly drained away. So whatever's happening in this upper, shallower crack system, it's being fed by that upper lava lake and upper magma chamber directly, right? That's what we're seeing there, right? So that's tells us that it's unlikely to have a volcanic southwest rift zone eruption without having a summit eruption first, right? That's an interesting thing about that dynamic there. That's a little bit similar to Maunaloa in that sense, right? It's hard for it to just pop out there and bypass everything altogether. Number 2, fissures propagated down the rift from the caldera, and the site of eruptions move continuously or sporadically down the rift in the wake of new fissures. So it propagates down here, it kind of keeps marching its way down. It always starts at the top and works downhill. That's essentially what they're saying. Number 3, in the directly observed eruptions, lava was seen or heard flowing down rift in some fissures, right? So it's not pressurized in that crack where it's frothing from 3 kilometers down and it's going to fountain out of the crack. It's actually able to flow in the crack within sight from someone standing on the surface and not be fountaining out of the crack, right? So you might have gas spots in some areas. A lot of fissures certainly were putting out gas, but not enough that it's actually not fountaining out of those initial areas. It is when it's getting further down, then you start seeing the fountains and the fissures, and it build up, and you see cinder spatter cones and everything else after that. But in some areas, it's not doing that. That's interesting as well. This is fairly unique. And number 4, lava was erupted along many kilometers. So these are fairly long fissures that erupt in the southwest rift, right? That's the other part of that pattern. Some other interesting things here. The potential for eruption in the southwest rift may increase with the amount of seaward displacement of the south flank caused by the forceful intrusion of magma into the east rift zone. So let me say that again, right? As magma goes into the east rift zone over and over and over and over again, that torques the south flank, and it may help wedge open the southwest rift a little bit so that magma can then utilize that pathway. But you can't get that unless you have a lot of movement of the south flank, in theory caused by the combination of magma intrusion and gravity as well. They only mention magma in this case, right? They do say, this is not to suggest that magma placement is passive in the sense of magma filling a void. Right, I pointed this out as well. Here's a 71 vector diagram with arrows pointing out from the eruption site as well, right? They say that passive emplacement will be inconsistent with the displacements during these eruptions. So that's the key there, right? And remember that we're seeing this ratio of 1 to 10 southwest rift to southeast rift, and that's kind of what they're saying as well. Is when you let's say you get to your 10th east rift eruption, maybe the next one might, maybe at that point you're more likely to have a southwest rift because you've torqued the south flank, holding it in enough, right? So we'll leave that at there. And the last thing here, which I think is interesting in our context of Maunaloa, eruption along the southwest rift zone could be inhibited by an increase in compressive stress across the zone when magma reservoir in neighboring Maunaloa is inflated, effectively squeezing the rift zone closed. So they had seismic crises at other times, like let's say 1975, Maunaloa erupted in 75. Before the eruption of Mauna Loa, those seismic crises did not follow the path of 74 down a southwest rift because maybe Mauna Loa was squeezing it closed by inflating and pushing against it. So that's another dynamic that's interesting. Is Mauna Loa is inflating, less likely to have a southwest rift zone eruption, and perhaps when it's not inflating, you're slightly more likely. So we'll see how that's another interesting thing to keep track of as these volcanoes possibly relate and possibly affect each other. And we'll watch those patterns as we progress through these next phases of eruptive history here in Hawaii Island. So this is a set of maps from Holcomb, 1987 here, that I've enlarged, and I've paired it with this table from Don Swanson's paper on a Kauai fault system of intrusions in the Kauai fault zone. So once again, just to point this out, our southwest rift zone is the area right over here. Our southeast rift, upper east rift is this one, and then further over this way, and the Kauai is this area in between. Right? So this is why I want to talk about all these together, is because we have this era of 1964 is really fascinating, right? In the 1960s, 64, because you had magma come into the southwest rift, and then cut over into the Kauai fault zone, and then cut back up the east rift. That's pretty snake-like circuitous path for the magma to get to the upper east rift there, but that's what the pattern indicated there. So you can see that these areas are all connected. 65 to 79, you can see quite a lot of southwest rift intrusions. Here's the shallow arm, and here is the deep arm. Right, the little black spots are the lava flows during that era that were short-lived, and this larger grayer one is a long-lived eruption of Maunaloa that began in 69 here and continued into the 1974 era right through there, where you can see there's also Kauai intrusions. Not so much southwest rift in this era, right? Although we're definitely missing the 74 and 71 eruptions on this particular map. I'm not sure why they didn't get on here, and I did not have time to add them myself. But certainly active there. 75 to 79, you can see upper east rift, middle east rift, and Kauai active. And 80 to 84, quite a lot into the southwest rift, somewhat into the Kauai, and obviously a lot into the east rift as we fed the pool eruption. And this paper was published at that point, so there's nothing past that, but I can summarize for you guys that really from 85 to 2018, the East Rift Zone was erupting and intruding lots of times, mostly all East Rift Zone, hardly anything in the Southwest Rift, until 2006, where there was an intrusion in the Southwest Rift as well, 2006. We'll look at that here briefly as well. To understand a little bit of how this develops and how these things are all connected, we're going to talk a little bit about this Upper East Rift Zone area. Here is a cross-section from Montgomery Brown et al. Paper relating to the 2007 dikes. They're also mentioned the 97, 99 dikes, but here's our summit magma chamber. Our Upper East Rift Zone is over here. Here's the bend. Right? So here's where the magma is turning and then moving into the East Rift Zone and making blades that are long in this direction, right? Like the one drawn on here, right? And looking at it on the end, cut on the side, you only see a sliver of it, something like that. So it's the magma coming down, rounding this bend, and then injecting a dike, and then injecting another dike, and injecting another dike. And you maybe can see in this lower image here 1997 is in blue. 1999 is in green. 2007 is in orange, right? And in the future, we'll talk more about this factor, right? There's a new paper that just came out about repeated periodic intrusions in this East Rift Zone area, with some period of 8 years, every 14-year periods, and combining that with the slow flip events. That's a topic for a different day. But just to show that this is an area where this does happen. Dikes get injected over and over into this area, right past the bend on the East Rift Zone, Middle East Rift here. And correspondingly, this is a measurement from 2003 to 2014. 11-year average of displacement across the East Rift. East Rift runs right through the middle here. You can see 7.8 centimeters of offset from the station north of the Rift Zone to the one south of the Rift Zone. Close to the bend and further away, you see less movement, 1.6 centimeters, but still moving, still spreading apart, right? So the Rift Zone is spreading. The thing is that on this upper side is Maunaloa. And as the Rift Zone tries to spread, it really can't push that way at all. So when it pushes against this northern side, it ends up pushing and moving itself to the south. So the Rift Zone, in fact, this spreading across it has had a consequence, and that is this development of what I've been calling the East Rift Zone connector after Don Swanson here. And so at some early time, early in the volcano, close to when it was emerging, maybe 100,000 years ago, 150,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, somewhere in that range, you initiate this migration, right? So at some point you had what's drawn as this connector attached to the reservoir in line with the East Rift Zone. But as the East Rift Zone erupts lava and it can't push to the north, it pushes itself to the south. Right? Then this connector has to rotate, and now it's in this position. And after another increment of time to today, now we have an East Rift Zone connector which is inclined at an opposite angle that cuts across the grain before going into what's quote-unquote the real East Rift Zone, right, where the real pathway of magma actually develops over there. So the thing is that when you have a crack that's coming this way, and then you just want to bend it over, the Earth doesn't like to crack at angles like that. You know, it wants to continue this crack across. And so across this boundary, this is the Kauai fault zone, right, at time 2, and time 3, and at time 2. And prior to that, you could have considered it being that south wall of the caldera. So it's like a south caldera wall feature migrating to the south to keep up with its East Rift Zone, which is also migrating to the south. And that's why Don Swanson proposed to call this the East Rift Connector rather than the Upper East Rift Zone, because it's a different beast altogether than what you're seeing in the rest of the Rift Zone. Right? Even down to Leilani, it's different than it is in this upper portion right in here. Right? And you have various ways of trying to gauge initiation time, and so they're saying here 144,000 years, 130,000 years, 108 to 93, 81, somewhere, you know, that's the range of it, of when you started seeing the initiation of the East Rift Zone in this form. Okay, so drawn on a map here. This is a map from Don Swanson where he actually writes on here, Upper East Rift Zone, or in quotes, East Rift Connector, and that's where I've got this terminology from, even though I've messed it up sometimes and called it the Upper East Rift Connector, which kind of put them both together, and hopefully that's still clear what that means. But that's this area now that's connecting. You can see these black lines are the faults. These are the caldera faults over here, the main ones through here, but you actually have an outermost caldera fault that goes all the way back over here. It includes Puhima crater. So really, some of these eruptions that appear to be in this Upper East Rift Zone by Luamano in 74 are actually still caldera eruptions right through there. And you really have had no eruption in historic time anywhere through here, until you get to close to this bend area right through here. Hiaka, Pauahi craters, Aloi, Maunaloa, Alai, all through there, right? Kind of this being the margin over here. So all through there, right? I mean, maybe you could even abbreviate it over here. No eruptions in historic time at all. Right, and considering how often we've had eruptions on the rest of the East Rift Zone, that's noteworthy, and you know, even more on the Southwest Rift than this little area right through here. But you can also see this fault system, how the East Rift Zone I've talked about how rift zone before is really rift zone is a combination of magma injecting a magma pathway and a fault zone, right? So it's a fault zone that's being used as a magma pathway, but it is still a fault zone. So here you can see that the traces of those faults and the kind of the grain of the island. And it's very easy to see this grain of the East Rift over here on the right side, moving right into the grain of the Kauai fault system over here on the left side. And so it's really the same structure. And if I were to zoom out more, you'd see that this connects and aligns to the Southwest Rift further over, and we'll get to that here shortly. But first, we're going to focus on the Kauai itself, and here are eruptions adjacent to the Kauai fault system and uneruptive periods, but all of them that have shown cracks, ground breakage within the Kauai. So you can see even East Rift Zone events, 24 did erupt in the Kauai, or even down in the lower East Rift, but it cracked the Kauai. Cracked in 38 without erupting, cracked in 1950 without erupting, cracked in 1960 without erupting. 62, there was an eruption nearby, also cracked. I've highlighted those in here, the ones that erupted in this more tan color. And one eruption in purple, May of 73, we're going to hone in on, and it uses our starting case study right in here. That's one photographed. They cut across the bottom of Hiaka Crater, the wall of Hiaka Crater, across the Chinook Craters Road, and across the roadway over here as well. So you actually can drive Chinook Craters Road, you drive right across this area. There's a little pull-off right over here now. You can walk around and steer into this fissure and this lava flow of May 73. It also erupted in Palahi Crater, a little bit further to the south. But moving past these later eruptions here, what was most noteworthy is, like, here's a map of that 73 eruption, is that there was one piece of it that erupted over here on the Kauai itself. Only a kilometer in from the edge, but the first time in recorded history someone had actually seen lava come out of anywhere west of that area, right? West of that fissure. So let's zoom into this a little more. Right there, it is, right there. That's this little pad. Wasn't active very long. In fact, there were reports of them seeing signs of the gases emitting and lava, and then they tried to get out there, but within an hour, when they got there, they only saw gas coming out and no more lava. So it was a very, very short-lived kind of thing that occurred right over here. But that's just what made the surface, right? So there actually have been surveys done, and they did surveys in 73 across the Kauai further west, right? So it's hard to tell. This is our eruption site that we just pointed out, and here's the ones by Hiaka Crater, and further on a rift zone further over, right? So now we're talking about way further over than that. We are seeing on these profiles, I'm going to amplify this here for you guys. It looks like this. You can see like the ground is sloping down, and then there's a bulge, and a giant crack, and then the bulge goes back down and it resumes. So when you see that kind of bulge, that tells you that there was lava injected underground. You can use the crack as some determination of how close to the surface it actually is, right? That's the interesting thing there. Although it gets complicated if things get loose and start falling in, that gets more complicated. In any case, during these two transects, they found evidence of magma injecting underground here and here, all this distance away from the eruption site over there. So not only is lava erupting once in a while, more often it's actually coming into the Kauai fault zone and injecting into these cracks passively. Now we're seeing that there's not that nearly as forceful injection, because we're not seeing a huge amount of eruption sites on this Kauai area, right? It's actually pretty rare. There was another one found we'll discuss that were found over here, these two other scoria sites that we'll discuss. It was the topic of the paper by Don Swanson and all, 2018, where we got this diagram from here. So you can see from this as well that just like the East Rift can have a range, right, a whole zone that's a width where you can have dikes come in and anywhere along it, all those cracks exist. You can have the same thing in the Kauai, where this dike is way over here, and then this one is way over here. That's a similar kind of width. So you can see that the possibility of magma coming into these cracks in the Kauai exists often. Even if they don't erupt often, they can quite often come in and fill that area underground. This is a different version of that same data, right? Where now we have drawn on here where we think that those dikes are actually in place, and this is based on this whole triangulation survey here, right? And they actually have, if you can see that, the green is where the lines ended up contracting, right? It came closer together, and the red is where they're expanding. So the dike comes in an area like this, and you see expansion from here to here. It's surrounding the dikes. That's what you see. And then everywhere else, it's getting squeezed together, right? Because of this forceful injection there and there and there, right? So interesting. It seems to have that sign of force in there as well, but it's passive enough that you don't see nearly as many eruption sites on the Kauai further up. Along those same three profiles, A, B, and C, in that previous slide, let me put it back if it wasn't clear. Here's A, here's B, and here's C. Those are the three lines across this zone. 1970 to 2018, close to. And you can see that there are certain events like earthquake swarms or intrusions that really jump the signal up quite a lot. But apart from those step events, most of what you see is a slower, steadier rise, right? Which goes to show that this is a actively moving fault zone, and it usually moves not through big earthquakes, not through intrusions, but it kind of just creeps along and accommodates whatever's happening in the summit to the north. Remember, this is like the proto-southern caldera edge here, so it's like the accordion edge of it, and anything to the north that needs accordion south has that whole zone of deformation that it can use to accomplish that. Right? And you can do some studies of the changing rates over time and dynamics. We're not going to go to that level of depth for you guys here today, just to point out that there is that kind of pattern, and it is moving all the time, which is interesting as well. So this is not unique to 73 or other times. Here's 1965, and the darker plots on these areas are places where cracks were seen to have opened up during these surveys, and then cracks opening along the Cleveland Poly Road, lots of places all through here and all through here as well, right? Showing quite a wide area of cracking during that 1965 event. Okay, let's move on from there and talk a little bit about this most recent discovery by Don Swanson and others. Yeah, and that wasn't just Don, but I'll focus on Don here. And they're marked here with these two pink dots on the Kauai over here, west of. Here's our map of where the East Rift Zone was. And that eruption of May 73. And you can see a little bit better now. You can see that the East Rift connector belongs in here. The structure of the East Rift Zone follows this way. The Kauai lines right up, and the Kauai goes as far as to where it starts curving around to feed into the Southwest Rift Zone, right? So really the Kauai is the connection, Southwest Rift to the East Rift, right? And that's why you consider this really all caldera, right? Then you can understand the dynamics a little different within this triangle than they are further in other parts of the volcano here. But focusing on these two zones right in here, this is a eruption that was just discovered recently by these researchers, and here's what it actually looks like. Here is a crack on a Kauai fault, and what's marked as S is this zone of spatter. Right, and it's hard to tell, it's blown up in here, what it actually looks like. Just a little layer of cinders and all that, right? It's not that unusual, especially if you've seen Leilani. But when you see it nowhere else, anywhere along a crack, except in areas like this, and here you can see it piled up, along the edge of this crack, then that gives you the evidence you need to say, oh, there's an eruption that happened here. And so they finally discovered this. They've done dating studies and chemistry studies, and long story short, it looks like it belongs in this era of the mid-1800s, right? People were around, but there was no report of this discovered yet. It can range, right, from slightly earlier to mid, but they prefer somewhere right in the middle, right in here as a possible age. Somewhere 1840, there was an eruption with a lot of movement. 1868, there was an eruption. Somewhere maybe 1832, there was an eruption. There's a whole bunch of activity through here that they could possibly correlate. Okay, let's move on from there. And show you guys this again. So what you actually can see here, how you can have connection Southwest Rift and Kauai. And let's point that out once again. Connection of the East Rift and Kauai. And you really can see those patterns now, especially in things like this, right, where it really can see, looks like the same feature across, and you'd hardly know that there was something else happening with the Upper East Rift connector right through there. Okay, so 2006 was the most recent Southwest Rift Zone intrusion. Here is an INSAR plot showing the area of the greatest deformation. And the earthquakes, you see earthquakes, interestingly, the Makane Pile area as well. You see them Upper East Rift area as well. You see them in Middle East Rift Pu'o as well. But you also see much more of them in this seismic Southwest Rift over here, right? Not only here, but actually coming down, and it looks like it actually has a little dog leg, right? Not unlike the parallel shape of the East Rift, right? You know, a little dog leg right there because of this Kauai Southwest Rift interaction right there as well. So not as common recently, likely because you had all that open pathway to Pu'o, but still happening occasionally. This may correspond to that surge in magma supply we saw to Kīlauea and Maunaloa during this era, and maybe you just had too much to get it all out, and that's why you had the chance to put some in the Southwest Rift over there. And remember, you know, only 1 out of 10 erupts, so didn't erupt, just stored underground there. Okay. 2011 to 2012, there is a series of earthquakes. This panel here on the left, this whole one over here, the earthquake is down here next to my shoulder. And it was 2 magnitude 3.5 earthquakes. And this INSAR is suggesting a 10 centimeter drop from the line of sight look of the satellite. Fresh cracks. And when I saw, whoa, a 10 centimeters drop, maybe we better go out and check that area and see that there's nothing going on there, that, you know, maybe there was a small eruption we didn't even see. They went out there and looked, no small eruption. But this is actually where they found the other one I just showed you guys, was actually right in that area. So if they hadn't seen this event and gone out there to look again, where they had actually already mapped and had already looked and missed it the first time, found it the second time, going back to look at these earthquake deformation impacts in the area. It's really fascinating. So this was 2012, 2011, similar 1.5 centimeters, magnitude 3.6, 3.5 further east, 2 centimeters of offset, not nearly as big with these other ones on the right, but goes to show you these magnitude 3.5s are what's accommodating a lot of this motion. So when we're seeing earthquakes down in that area, that's all normal, and that's part of the whole caldera adjusting, right? Imagine if magma inflates the South Caldera area, it's pushing directly south on this whole Kauai zone right over there. All right, we're getting close here. I know it's been a long presentation. Thanks for bearing with me. If you guys are interested to this degree, looking at the gravity on the volcano here, we see a different pattern across the summit and the Kauai. You can see the spacing of these contours of gravity are different north of the Kauai. South, you see they're all close together, right? Close lines, right? And that is what you'd expect if you're injecting a lot of material in there, right, over time, and then sliding it away. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe I'm misspeaking here, and this is not exactly the effect. But what you're seeing suggested, though, is that the Kauai has the same domain, is in the same domain as the summit. So the idea being that as magma comes down Upper East Rift and injects in the Kauai, over and over and over again, you're essentially having this dike complex forming over here to the south. That's a different kind of magma storage area of the summit caldera, right, before it can get to other parts of the volcano, or in addition to getting to other parts of the volcano, where maybe you don't only activate it once you have magma going in the East Rift and coming back up, that kind of thing. So the gravity supports it as well as a point of this. So to tie it back together to the Southwest Rift here, here's our Southwest Rift zone right through here. Here's our 1974 fissures right through here. Right? And if you look closely, the traces of these correspond more closely to the Kauai direction than to the Southwest Rift direction. It's true that, you know, in the macro view, they do align to the direction of the Southwest Rift, but the individual segments align to the Kauai, right? So showing that the actual structure in here is the Kauai, even if likely that underground deep source of magma, seismic Southwest Rift, that deeper core, is oriented more in that direction, Right? So you have an interaction of that deeper pathway and the shallower grain, so to speak. Yeah. So a different view, similar here, without as much shading, so you can really see 1974 vents, their alignment here to the Kauai, right? Even if their overall direction might be more similar to the Southwest Rift Zone. So in comparison, here is that 73 vent on a Kauai, historic vents through here. So really, you can consider these all similar domain, especially once we saw evidence of we've seen that magma can actually go down this way and then move over here and then move back over here. Right? That's one of our more exotic examples, obviously, but it shows the connectivity that's possible through here. So, also proposed as a consequence of this East Rift connector is a Southwest Rift connector as well. So instead of calling it the seismic Southwest Rift Zone, an equivalent would be the Southwest Rift connector, because it's serving that same role where perhaps it actually had originally more of this direction, right, early on, but as the south flank, at depth especially, is moving away, it's been offset to the south. So now you have your real Southwest Rift at depth, your core of it, right, has the same bend right through there. But you also have a series of surface cracks shallower up because of this interaction of the volcanoes. And now you have two different pathways, a shallower one and a deeper one. And you can see how they all fit in place and connect with the Southwest Rift, and how once you have magma in this deep area into these cracks moving this direction, you could quite easily send it back over this way. Right? And that's how the Southwest Rift connects here to the Kauai, and how the Kauai connects to the East Rift with the East Rift connector. That's the whole story, and relevant here because of our pattern, our earthquake pattern as we see today. This is our plot today of the last month of earthquakes here, and you can see a little bit of this seismic Southwest Rift pattern, Southwest Rift connector right over here, this Upper East Rift Zone / East Rift connectors, or if you indulge me, Upper East Rift connector right through there, and on a whole summit region as well, right? So as we consider, if we start seeing these things pressurize and migrate more and more and more, or if we see other pathways of magma coming in, you might know what could be happening now. These are the components of this summit triangle here, which is really interesting as far as a locus of activity expected in the next phase of the volcano here. And I wanted to make sure we included earlier this deep earthquakes connection to the deep pathway of magma to Kilauea, so we know that we can ignore the blue ones as part of that deeper pathway and focus on this orange and red ones at this shallow pathway we talked about today as the Upper East Rift Zone, East Rift connector, Kauai fault zone, and the Southwest Rift. All right, Dane. Now shut up now.
All right. That was a good presentation. Thorough. Went through them all.
I wanted to touch on everything a little bit without really getting lost too deep into things. I could talk about each of these eruptions for probably a whole hour by themselves, but that's too much, obviously. And as it was already a lot. Yeah.
Right. We don't have many questions here. Got a couple. I did send you something, a link, maybe to pull up. Just a cool little animation of yesterday's earthquake. It looks like it might be upgraded to an 8.3. I've seen some seismologists talk about it. And the thing is that's the biggest earthquake since I think like 1965 or something like that in the United States. So definitely big earthquake, but they're calling it the lame monster because of how deep it was. That didn't generate anything, but just interesting little animation to show there.
Let me switch to it here. Show you guys this. UMN, University of Minnesota, perhaps? Seismology?
Yeah. I believe so.
I'm just going to loop here. So here's the zone of interest, obviously. Very interesting how you see those propagation of seismicity across the entire continent there, huh? Set off by that first one. Yeah, fascinating. I haven't seen that before yet.
Yeah, it came out not that long ago. It is Minnesota.
Okay, so let's see,
All right.
what does it say? It shows waves. So what it looks like is maybe each of those is a seismograph that's measuring the waves, and it's just showing how much it's actually measuring. Right? They're not. It's not like what we're just looking at, where each circle is actually an earthquake. Just to clarify that. Huh?
Right.
Which is what I first thought. I thought each one of those was an earthquake, but really each one is a seismograph.
No. Yeah, it's all seismograph. Just showing. I think it's showing the P waves and S waves coming through. I'm not sure though.
Yeah.
And just how the propagation time of
Right.
each of them.
Right. They're colored. Absolutely. That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, cool little thing. There is a question about that earthquake, and I've seen this asked a couple times. Is back to can the earthquake in Alaska trigger seismic activity here?
I mean, technically yes, because the volcano can be so primed to erupt that anything can do it. We've talked about it being tidal effects. We've talked about it being extraterrestrial effects. We've talked about it being rainfall, right? We've talked about it. So certainly yes, but it has to be primed of its own accord, ready to go already. And at that point, literally anything can set it off. What's going to set it off first? Is it going to be that earthquake or the next tide? At that point, it could set it off. Yeah.
All right. I do want to shout out, we did have 2 super chats. One from our continued friend, Gary Bryan, $35. Says, appreciate all the work you guys put into these updates and special features. Fascinating. And there was a $10 donation from Bill. He says, thanks, guys.
Mahalo, Bill.
Yeah, thank you, guys. One question was just easy one. Did the seismographs in Hawaii pick up on the earthquake?
Yes. Yeah. When that big gets picked up all over the world, and they have a particular use in seismology because you generate a large enough signal that you can measure the whole structure of the Earth with an earthquake that big. So really valuable data point.
And one of the things that immediately jumps out to me on that was when in 2018 the collapse events would happen. In order to declare them a collapse event, the USGS would wait for the signal to propagate to California and Alaska, and then use that data to cross-examine. Then they could make the call pretty quickly once they had it. But that would take half hour, 20 minutes, something like that. For that particular signal that they were looking for.
Right. Yeah. The point being that five pointers were detectable on the mainland from here. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Marin, our mod of Hawaii Tracker, asks, how is the Puhi-Ma'u thermal area connected to the East Rift Zone connector, or is it not?
The Puhi-Ma'u area, let me pull up a map that can show that. Here's one. All right, so there is Puhi-Ma'u, and there is the outermost caldera fault. So the Puhi-Ma'u thermal area right here is perhaps utilizing that outermost caldera fault as a pathway for gas emissions there, right? Especially when you consider that the South Caldera reservoir is closer to here than to inside of Halemaʻumaʻu, right? So possibly there's a pathway out to Puhi-Ma'u. And so it's really at the boundary, right? I consider that, so the eruption that was at Luamanu was within the caldera, right through there, right? You can see that the connector here is drawn and include all the way to Luamanu. And it's interesting, when you have eruptions within this connector, they often open in that same fabric this way, right? Which is different, right? It's harder to open a crack because you have to have some torque there involved as well. Whereas in the East Rift, you can just open it straight to the sides, and that's way easier, and that's where the magma can fit the best. So interesting, yeah. Puhi-Ma'u is that really in between zone. I would call it just barely in that upper East Rift connector, the crater itself. But when you start getting to the thermal area, you see this how this fault starts to have several strands, right? It splays out a little bit. So there's something funny happening here. And this is that transition zone to all these different, essentially remnant South Caldera structures, right? That merges into Kauai. So, yeah, it's a good question. It's right in the border, and I would put it in the connector. as far as the crater itself, right? Because the crater seems like there's a separate craters form over some magma reservoir that collapses. So there was something that was separate from the main caldera over here, right? So I would call that part of the east connector. But then that thermal area, maybe, if it collapses, same thing, magma body stored in there, maybe it's a separate thing. Yeah, I don't have a good answer, Marion.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I was just looking on it was the area around there, the one pronounce this right, Aloe crater that was buried by Maunaloa in 1970. Used to be such an active thermal area that so much steam came out of that spot that they designed the road to be a split road in that spot to prevent head-on collisions due to steam. If you've seen the steam whiteouts, like there's a couple that I've seen down the Loris Rift after the eruption, it just are incredible, and you could easily get in an accident of any kind because you can't even see your hand in front of your face, type thick steam. So really interesting stuff. Believe this is the final one. So the cracks that you were talking about earlier, we were getting some questions about how long are these cracks roughly? Are they 100 yards? Or are they a mile or multiple miles? Or
so we'll look at the map here, for example. And so this one has a little scale bar in it. So there's 2 kilometers right there. And so you see none of these was quite 2 kilometers. Maybe the longest one was 1.5. It's about a mile. So the longest individual crack might have been a mile, but most of them were less than that. Yeah, and then propagating further down, right? I don't know if this is actually close to 6 miles, right? Then maybe they're closer in the order of quarter mile, half mile long in this particular eruption case. Yeah,
right.
Individually, yeah.
Well, that will do it for the questions. There is no Drones On series today. The earthquake last night kind of cut into recording. And so, yeah, we're going to be getting into it again next week with another episode. And that does it for me here, Phil. Thanks for the presentation.
And mahalo day, mahalo everyone who supported us by sharing video, by donations, and just by giving us your time and staying informed with the volcano and telling your friends what's going on, and there's nothing to worry about, and it's interesting to feed our curiosity now and prepare ourselves for the next time there's actually some more serious impact to our communities with the volcano here. So this is the fun time. That's to play with the curiosity, play with the ideas, see what kind of things have happened in the past, what could be possible in the future, and no really reason to worry at this point in time. Is still
So one I missed. Quick question. Freeman asked, are you sticking with Kilauea being active again within 3 weeks?
Yeah, I still feel like it's a matter of weeks, and I would say not months. So I would say probably not 2 months. So maybe 6 weeks at the outside. I could easily be wrong.
The volcano that likes to make people wrong. Yeah,
the south flank moves different than it has been and makes a bunch of more space. Suddenly we're resetting. We have to start all over, or, reset the model and say, okay, well now with the new storage volume and the current pressure and the rate of influx, now when is it going to reach some kind of threat? So things can change pretty quickly. Right. So it's an educated guess, given what we know right now, expecting the same pattern to continue. And honestly guessing, just based on what we've seen happen over and over and over again, right? Yeah, we wouldn't have expected Maunaloa to just shift down into neutral a couple months ago. And that happened, so you just never know.
All right,
mahalo, Freeman.
That'll do it for me.
Mahalo, Dane. Yeah, mahalo, Freeman. Mahalo, everyone who gave us a question or gave us a share or a like. And we'll come back to you guys next week once again. It'll be August at that point in time. We'll start. That's the month that maybe we will see some other kind of changes. We'll kind of wait and see. It's changing in slow motion. So while we have the chance, we'll bring you guys some of this extra content, and then once things speed up, we'll refocus on more of what's happening at present as there are more and more signals manifesting as they manifest. Mahalo, everybody. I'm Hawaii Tracker. He's Dan DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha.